So often when I get up and talk at libraries conferences, and I've presented reports like this before in New Zealand and in Victoria, all of the library staff want to vague out. They think this is too hard because we've got an economist speaking. Well, in essence, we haven't done anything very complex here. All that we've done is put a clear framework around the benefits that public libraries provide to their communities, and we've used some economic valuation techniques to put dollar values on those. So nothing that we've done should be a surprise to you. The only thing that's a bit technical is how we've actually valued the benefits. So I'll try to be, I don't want to dress this up into be anything more technical than it is, because it's not actually that technical, so it should be very digestible to you all. And I'll try to get through the presentation. I think I've got 45 minutes allocated, but I'll try to get through that a bit quicker than that, so we've got time for questions. And then Mark, my colleague, will be presenting a tool that will allow each of you to calculate the benefits generated by your own individual library services, which is available on the website, so you can use that in your own advocacy efforts. So I'm going to talk about the whole study, and I think I should just get into it. When we were first commissioned, there were 4 interrelated objectives. The first was to expand understanding of the value that public libraries contribute to their communities, and to provide public libraries, provide evidence that public libraries produce economic benefit for their communities. So there are 2 things that we've done. We've used economic techniques to value the welfare impacts on communities that are promoted by public libraries. And we've also used another technique, an econometric technique called input-output modelling, to show how much economic activity is associated with public library activities in each of their municipalities, and then collectively across the state. With those results, I guess today we want to aim you with the confidence in the results, and that they've been calibrated and estimated both robustly and defendably, and so you can go back to your own library services and advocate as well as possible. So economics can be used for a whole variety of things. We've basically used 2 techniques which each individually answer one question. Are public libraries worth the effort? We've used a thing called cost-benefit analysis, which basically says, do the benefits of public libraries outweigh their costs? A very simple question. You already know what the benefits are, and if you don't, I'm going to articulate how we've conceived the benefits, but my experience to date in the library services area is that library staff very well know the benefits of the libraries. It's how do you put a value on them. The costs are very well known and published. It's the public library's operating costs, be that through staff, consumables, resources, and electronic. And all that we've done is we've taken for each library an estimate of their benefits, subtracted their costs to get a measure of net benefits. And as has been pointed out by Jeanette, luckily enough, not luckily enough, not surprisingly either, the benefits outweigh the costs by a significant margin, meaning public libraries provide a very strong return to their communities. The second technique we've used is a thing called economic impact assessment. So what we've done here is basically looked at, well, how do public libraries provide some stimulus to their local area economies? And again, we know what that stimulus is already. It's their operating expenditures that as they buy and sell, as they buy services locally, and as they employ staff who spend locally, and also as library users are incentivised to make some spending locally because of activities that they undertake as a result of being a library user. So we add those 2 things together and say, that's the stimulus that they provide to the economy. And we use a thing called input-output modelling to say, well, in local economies, there's lots of transactions that happen. And if we measure all of the flow-on transactions from that stimulus provided by local economies, we have a multiplier of, well, how much does the flow-on add to the initial surplus to give a total economic impact. And so with those multipliers, we estimate for each library service the level of regional income, the level of regional value added that it engenders in the local economy, and with that, what is the level of employment that is created and supported in generating that and supporting that activity. The report also talks a lot about some qualitative insights that we can use to help bring the numbers to life. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on that today because I want to focus on the numbers and how they work, because of my understanding of how well you guys already understand the context of public library contributions. So this is how, so when we first started off, we did a literature review. So how do public libraries contribute to their community? And we didn't just review literature around libraries. We reviewed literature around things like environmental facilities and recreational and cultural facilities and other items of public good. That's an economic term, but items that provide significant benefits even though people aren't expected to directly pay for those goods. And we find in that literature that there's quite a strong history of a framework for how benefits are distributed across different beneficiaries. And in essence, we've captured the benefits that are available to the users of libraries and the non-users of libraries. If you ask anyone who doesn't drive a car, is it worth having roads? The answer is always yes, because they can see the value that those roads provide to others. And similarly with libraries, the Queensland community is very familiar. Those that don't use library services strongly support libraries and they are willing to pay for those libraries. So under the user benefits, so we've got use and non-use benefits. We have direct user benefits and indirect user benefits. So those direct user benefits really relate to using the resources and services that are provided at the library. And as Janet pointed out, we haven't really effectively captured the value of those resources that are available in the online sphere. So this talks about the value or the benefits that are provided by using books and journals, newspapers, DVDs, the reference collection, the programs and services that are offered by the libraries. The other direct user benefit is the social interaction that is engendered through that use of services and through participation in library programs, and just the incidental interaction that happens at being at a high quality public and welcoming space. From an indirect point of view, those users also benefit in that libraries create a sense of place and a sense of local amenity through the local buildings, through the library buildings themselves and their contributions to the urban environment, but also the social cohesion and the feeling of well-being, being a part of an integrated community. Libraries also provide benefits in terms of the environmental savings that they deliver, in that the resources of the library are used time and time again by different users. And I'd have to say up front, I don't believe our numbers effectively capture that benefit. So again, the numbers are probably a little bit conservative. And library users also vary from a whole wide variety of other contributions that are made through use. Contributions to literacy, contributions to career development, contributions to education, and even health. Now, from a non-user point of view, there are three basic types of benefits that accrue. If I don't use libraries, if you asked me 10 years ago, do I use a library? The answer would have been no, I haven't been to a library for years. But boy, has that changed as my life has changed its trajectory through a family and things. And so the option value of using library and services is a real benefit. If you ask people that don't use libraries, one of the greatest things that they value is the option to use it in future. And the other benefit is really the benefit of knowing that current communities and future generations also have use of those essential services, even though the non-users don't use the libraries themselves. So that's the framework that we adopted. Now, to measure that framework, or to value the benefits that are segregated in that framework, we've had to apply 3 techniques. The first 2 techniques, the travel cost method and the financial savings method, really only capture those direct use benefits. And the travel cost method is basically relies on the rationality of people. And that means people wouldn't go to a library if it wasn't worth the effort. So all that we really do in the travel cost method is basically work out how far do people travel to libraries, what time does it take for them to be there, and how long do they spend at libraries, and the value of that time and out-of-pocket expenses must at least be a minimum measure of benefit. The second technique, so I would have thought, I would suspect, and it's true, that the travel cost technique is one of the more conservative ways of valuing those direct use benefits. The financial savings technique basically says because public library services are provided mostly free of charge or at a highly subsidised rate, if you were to replace, if users of libraries had to seek those services in the private market, what would it cost them to substitute those services for the public services? And so, for example, if the collections weren't available, people would have to use other, either buy the products, they'd have to go to fee-for-service based programs, they might have to pay rentals on meeting rooms and spaces that are currently provided by public libraries. So some might argue that this is a relatively generous estimate of the benefits that are provided to that direct user benefit, because the rational economists would say people, if they had to pay, they would consume less. But that's a flawed thing to say, because if they consume less, there would be a social cost in that lack of consumption. That's why governments exist, to provide public services. Those things are being questioned as we speak. The third technique was a thing called contingency valuation. And that's basically where you ask people, if you had to pay on an annual basis to maintain public library services, what would you be willing to pay for that? And so as you can see, the contingency valuation technique covers both the direct and indirect benefits that are delivered to users when you ask users, and when you ask non-users separately, it covers that option, legacy and existent benefits that are provided. So in theory, there's no superior technique in these valuations. One isn't better than others, assuming that the way that the data is gathered is not flawed, and we've put a lot of effort into making sure that we designed these surveys to be as robust as possible. So I think when we're communicating the results of the study, we're going to use an average of the 3 techniques, because what we're really doing is adding up components, and we get different measures undoubtedly, but I think if we take an average, there is some real robustness in doing that. Okay, so when we talk about the economic impact assessment, so what level of economic activity do public libraries underpin in their local economies? As I mentioned before, we have the direct impacts of the public libraries, being how much they spend on staff and consumables and buying resources and all sorts of things. I'm sure you're all very familiar with how your money is spent in public libraries. And then there are other incidental transactions that are promoted in the local economy because people are users of public libraries. Now, SGS has developed, there is a thing at the national level called the National Input-Output Table. It's part of the national accounts. And what that basically is a major survey of all the transactions at the national level between industry groups. And all that we've done in the modelling here is scaled down that national input-output table to a local level. So we have a good indicator of how local industries buy and sell to each other, and how they export and import to the local economy. And from that analysis, we generate things called multipliers, and they are expressed in the terms of employment, value added, and local output multipliers, which can't be added together. But all that they do is those 3 things at the bottom, they are different expressions of the level of activity that public libraries underpin in their local economy. So, before I go on, so stimulus equals the direct impacts, multipliers give us the indirect impacts of public libraries, the total impacts are simply direct plus indirect impacts. Sorry if I'm telling you how to suck eggs. Now, so once we set up that once we set up that clear framework answering two very specific questions, we did a lot of market research, aided by the 7 case study libraries. Thank you very much for your assistance, and through telephone surveys. So, as you could see on the figure here, we did almost 5,000 online interviews with people, users of libraries, across a cross-section of public libraries in Queensland, which were hand-picked to make sure that those 7 were a representative sample of all public libraries in Queensland, as best it could be anyway. We also did telephone surveys with over 1,000 Queensland households who were the population of the non-user group. So we rang lots of Queensland households and said, "Are you a member of a public library?" If they said yes, we hung up. If they said no, we said, "Why don't you use them?" And we went through a whole variety of questions and said, how do you value libraries even though you don't use them? So this is how my colleagues did a relatively extensive data analysis of the Queensland communities, and they looked at current population levels, they looked at population growth levels, and they looked at relative socioeconomic advantage and disadvantage to come up with how we might segment the Queensland community to ensure that when we picked our public library services that we were being as robust as possible and providing results that could be scaled up to the state level. And as you can see on the slide there are 7 different types of communities that we see as operating in Queensland: the metropolitan communities, high growth communities, disadvantaged centres, regional centres with stable population, small rural communities, declining communities, and the resource-based sector. And as you can see, Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, Fraser Coast, Mackay, Goondiwindi, Peru and Mount Isa were earmarked to represent those centres and were our case study libraries. So in terms of the results, this chart talks about how users, the frequency of use of public libraries. And what it shows is that members use libraries quite regularly. Indeed, 85% of public library members go at least once a month. So that is in itself a reflection of the value provided by public libraries in Queensland. In terms of what is a primary purpose of visit, this chart tells us that, so the dark green is the main purpose of the visit, with the middle shade of green being the secondary purpose. And it tells us that the primary purpose of public library visiting in Queensland is from a recreational point of view. Now, when that recreational obviously includes using and borrowing books and attending programs, but it's also something that follows through and that finding is manifest in subsequent findings. And it's in a way, this is artificial, this chart, because people will be doing research and studying in education in recreational pursuits or not. It probably tells us more that other libraries and other information providers might be more apt for education, core education providers like university libraries, and are used by university students and things like that. In terms of what people do when they're at libraries, there are 2 very clear standouts in this, and people borrow things, and they borrow books and they borrow resources that are available. No surprise there. The other sort of middle tier of what people do is they use the collections and the resources and the programs and the staff that are provided on site. So instead of borrowing, they might not just borrow, but they use those and consume those services while they're there. And there are also a variety of other things that they do. I won't go into these charts in detail because it's in the report, and there's pages and pages of things that you can use at your leisure. But in terms of the benefits that are provided to the benefits that are provided to the individuals who are the users of the library, the first 2, so the dark green again signifies the one that are agreed as the major benefits to them. I guess firstly, there is significant agreement that there is a vast array of benefits, but of those that really stand out, it is how libraries contribute to enjoyable and meaningful pastimes and how it enables people to pursue hobbies and interests. As we go down the tier, it contributes to the lifelong learning and helping obtain information. And as we go down a little bit further, how libraries promote a sense of community belonging. And this thing, whilst it's not as pronounced as the recreational and the functional usage of the resources, this community belonging and this sense of place, it's interwoven in all of our results. And then supporting children's education, so people are talking about how it helps others in their families. If we ask library users how it makes contributions to the community, so not particularly thinking about themselves, but how do they think public libraries contribute to the broader community? Again, we're talking about providing safe and pleasant places, contributing to lifelong learning and improving literacy, encouraging socially responsible behaviour, and providing internet access for all, and contributions to adult literacy, and so on. So, some of the things that always stand out are some of the quotes that people make when they're asked, what do you like about libraries? What are the best things about libraries? And on here, I've listed a number of the memorable quotes, and I think I'll read through at least some of them. The range of materials, the comfortable surroundings, and the friendliness and helpfulness of staff. I guess when we get to question time, I'm probably in a good position to be able to comment on how this Queensland work complements and adds value to the work that's been done in Victoria. But certainly, in all of these quotes and in the data, the places, the people, the resources are always coming out. I love the mix of people. It attracts from all ages and all walks of life. It promotes community. I guess just the top one here. We moved from overseas with very little, and the library was fantastic, both for resources and helping us integrate into the community. And while we're on that point, certainly the case study, I won't detail the case study work, but certainly the results in Mackay and Mount Isa shows that how, when you've got a high turnover of community members because of fly in, fly out, or the mining type or related work, how libraries really play a role in integrating and bringing those people into the community relatively swiftly. Okay, so here are some of the results. Using the financial savings technique, so this is if people had to replace library services with private fee-for-service operations, how much would they save per year? Almost $400 a year. If you asked your counsellors how much do you think of their rates people would be prepared to pay and to dedicate to library services, I think you'll find that they wouldn't go that high. From the contingency valuation point of view, so what would you contribute each year to maintain library services, even though you know you're not going to be asked to pay, or even though you know that this is not a measure that's going to drive libraries putting up fees. And people say more than $50 per annum, and probably more importantly, over 90% of respondents said here, I think they're worth more, but I don't have the capacity to pay more. In terms of travel costs, people spend almost 8 kilometres getting to the library, and they spend almost 40 minutes at the library in any particular visits. In terms of what people spend, so we're talking about the economic impact part of the second question here is they spend about $55 per annum due to library use. And when they go to the library, they also have almost $20 worth of incidental expenses elsewhere, going to the cafes, going to shops and stuff, as well of trips that are incorporated into the library visit. So if we then move on to the non-users, so these are the results of telephone surveys that were conducted throughout Queensland. What are the perceived benefits of libraries by non-users? And as we walk down the page, the level of significance in terms of large and moderate agreement in terms of these benefits reduces. So the top one being the one that the non-users most strongly identify with. supporting children's education, supporting children's early development, so strong connection with other members of their family, contribute to enjoying joyful and meaningful pastimes, seeking information, lifelong learning, pursuing hobbies and interests. So what we're finding is that the non-users are sort of reinforcing what the users say. There's no disconnect between non-users and users in terms of how they think libraries contribute to the communities. In terms of the perceived characteristics of library, again, we see libraries being safe and pleasant places to visit, facilitating lifelong learning, ensuring access to all, encouraging socially responsible behaviour. Those types of things are coming through again from the non-users. And if we ask the non-users what they're willing to pay to maintain library services, you can see there's quite a distribution. And when you ask people what they're willing to pay, there are two types of behaviour that can result. There's the sort of free rider effect. When people think, if people are asking me to pay, they think I'm going to be asked to pay. They say, I will pay nothing. And so that often skews the results if the surveys aren't appropriately designed. And other people might think, well, I know I'm not going to get actually asked to pay, so I'll answer very high. And so we've tried to control the survey to make sure that we get a robust and representative response of the Queensland community. And when we take the average of all those responses, we look at people, non-users of libraries are prepared to pay $32 per annum to support library services. And again, almost 90% of non-users said, I'd be prepared to pay more, but I can't afford to pay more. So what are some of the things that the non-users have said? Even these are, I mean, obviously we've only picked the best quotes, but there's still, very strong endorsements of public libraries for the community. Wouldn't be without them, act as a hub for the communities and a place where people can go and have access to resources and be treated the same. Equity, social equity comes through a lot in the results. Now, I don't have time, and to tell you the truth, I didn't do the case study research, so I can't talk at length about each of the case studies. They are detailed in the report proper, but what I've tried to pick out is just a thing, when I read the case studies, a message that really was brought home by individual case studies. Not to say that these messages aren't shared across the case studies, this is just how I'm presenting it for ease of consumption, I guess. So what the Brisbane City case study told us was, one of the big challenges for libraries is embracing new technologies and changing community expectations for libraries. The Sunshine Coast was very big on providing adult education and training opportunities. Fraser Coast was big on how when you co-locate public libraries with other services, it really enhances the outcome into these multi-use community facilities. Mackay was big on how innovative approaches to membership and programming can sort of mitigate the transient nature of the resource-based communities. Gundawindi, obviously being very sort of remote and geographically remote, was big on the delivery services provided to its community and how that provided value. Peru really drove home how libraries in a time of crisis are accentuated in the value that they deliver to their communities. In the work that we did in Victoria just after the Victorian bushfires, that also came out. When there is a natural disaster or some form of real crisis, the value of libraries is really accentuated, and people know and understand that. And Mount Isa servicing socially isolated community members, providing a key entry point for integration for new arrivals into a community. So in some of the common issues that were faced across the case studies, I don't think anything here is going to astound you. The insufficiency of funding, managing rising and changing community expectations, keeping abreast with emerging technologies and training staff to truly embrace those technologies and how that can help them deliver services better, attracting and retaining quality staff, and the actual promotion of the services that the libraries offer, so that the community is aware of those and is aware of the opportunities at their disposal. So there's lots of figures there on the board, and I guess what these figures do show, if you look down the cost column, is that the resourcing of the libraries are vastly different in different communities. It also shows, if we just look at the total down the bottom, that using the financial savings, travel costs and the contingency valuation methods, that all of the benefits, when you do it across the case studies, all of the value of the assessed benefits under each of those scenarios outweigh the costs. So that's quite a significant finding. In terms of the benefit cost ratio, so all that here is the value of the benefit divided by the value of cost, we will see that they do range significantly, but probably most importantly is that with very few exceptions, the value is greater than 1. So the benefits outweigh the costs. And indeed, the benefits can be much more significant than 1. In terms of local economic impacts, what we're really highlighting here is that across those 7 case studies, the contribution to Queensland income is $213 million per annum. The contribution to Queensland value added, so that's really income less imports, is $100 million. And across those case study areas, the libraries, when you take into account their direct employment effect and the flow-on effects that are induced in the local economies and the employment that supports, we're talking about those libraries supporting, almost 1,100 jobs on an ongoing basis. So, yes, the results are different because the methods are different in quantifying the benefits. But when we initially set out, the approach always was to take an average of those benefits. And when we do, and as has already been pointed out by Janet, the benefits of public libraries in Queensland, are about $478 million per annum compared to a cost of about $200 million, or the benefits outweigh the cost by a value of 2.3, or a factor of 2.3 to 1. Quite a significant finding, and undisputable in terms of real value generated to the community. So this is the Queensland results. Obviously, nothing's obvious until I say it. The 7 case studies. Mark has got a list of all the case studies, and it's in the report as well. So of all the municipalities across Queensland, we've done 7 case studies, and we've applied the results of those case studies on a per capita benefit basis to scale up to the Queensland economy, using each of the libraries' own cost structures. And in terms of the economic impact assessment, we've looked at how all of those libraries contribute to directly stimulating the Queensland economy and using the Queensland multipliers to look at their overall flow-on of the total economic impacts to make sure there's no double counting. So when we look at the Queensland economy and how public libraries underpin economic activity in Queensland, we can see that on an annual basis they're contributing over $600 million in in state income, almost $300 million in gross state product or value added in the Queensland economy, and more than 3,100 full-time job equivalents throughout Queensland. So, briefly, in conclusion, libraries contribute significantly to community welfare and economic activity, and using the results that we've estimated, undoubtedly they provide a sound economic return to the Queensland community. The numbers are robust, they've disciplined in terms of the design, and they've been appropriately informed. So this is not, we haven't taken a scattergun approach here. We've thoroughly researched literature, we've examined all the valuation options, we've used numerous techniques to ensure that we provide robust results. And we've done a lot of data, we've gathered a lot of data, they're all representative samples. So this is a rigorously informed result. Both Queensland library users and non-users appreciate the contributions made by libraries. And I haven't talked about it in the presentation, but it certainly is spelt out in the reports. We also asked non-users what their satisfaction ratings were and how public libraries might improve their service delivery. And I think what is a telling result is users don't talk about doing different things. They talk about deepening the current service levels and broadening the scope potentially of those. So what we're talking about are things like opening longer, providing a broader suite of programs, expanding the resources on the collections that are maintained by libraries. So maybe a little bit boring, but absolutely reinforcing the results and the benefits that are delivered by the public library services. So thank you. I'm happy to take questions, and in fact, I hope we do have questions. Mark is going to present on the calculator, so how each of you can use the results in your own municipality. I wonder if we should have some... I'm happy to... Anyone got any questions? Yell out so we can all hear.
I'm tidy up with stuff. I'm just interested, you were mentioning that the environmental resource sector... Speak up, Simon. Sorry? You mentioned very quickly or very shortly that resource sector communities, the libraries like people, is that for those people in the community or those people who come from the community because of employment and mining services, or is there any sort of analysis on that?
Can you comment on that? The way that I've interpreted the results, the way that I've interpreted it is that for people who are new arrivals, it's a great mechanism for becoming integrated into the community. But having lived in those sorts of communities, I think you'll find that what we don't want to see in those communities is the locals and the newcomers. So I would assume that the results are also talking about bringing those two groups together. I can't be more equivocal in my response, sorry. Okay, Mark, do you want to come up and talk about the calculator, and then maybe we can run through some questions collectively if there are any others.